Okay, hello everyone. My name is Arduz, and for this session of the AI Paper Club, I'm going to present an introduction to topological data analysis, fundamental and practical aspects for data scientists. My main motivation for choosing this paper, it's, I think, a question that all of us can relate when we are working with any type of data. And it's the question that when we are trying to answer what information, what are the characteristics, what are the specific qualities of the data that we are analyzing that we can perhaps use in some model or use to drive some conclusions of the data that we are analyzing. And yeah, this question we try to solve it in different types of approaches. But the one that I am going to explain now, it's one that is based on an area of mathematics that it's well studied, and it has been used for this mean just in the last 20 years, quite recent. So yeah, the idea of topological data analysis would be try to go for this question, to try to answer what would be the information of the data, and it's going to do this by trying to analyze the shape of the data. So here at the right, we have like one example that in terms of image recognition has been reviewed a lot, that is trying to classify 100 digits with the dataset of MNIST. So here we have like the number 8, and this is the number at figure A. And at figure B, we have like a more simplified version of it. Let's say that it's the skeleton of it. And then this connection of dots, this shape of the representation of number 8, we can try to get some features out of it with topology. And these features are going to be shown at C. These correspond to the Betty numbers, and the Betty numbers are representations of components and circular holes that the image has. We are going to review this later on, but I think yeah we can see that B0, that the beta 0 is going to represent that all of the shape is connected by one line, but it also has two different types of holes, one hole at the top and one at the bottom. And this would be like the characterization of this number that we could later use to a classification model, has input features, and then try to get a good prediction of what we are seeing at this image. So this would be the idea that we are going to have with TDA. We are going to get some input, and here also the definition of a metric is important, because the metric is going to tell us how similar, how different, how close points are within each other. Because on the idea on how similar they are, we are going to build shapes on top of the data. And after building these shapes, we are going to try to extract some features out of this representation of the information with some concepts of topology. So that will be the idea. We are going to get the data, we are going to transform it in other type of representation with topology. We are going to get some topological features out of it, and these features can be used later on for modeling. This would be like the general TDA pipeline. At the end, I would just mention some other applications of it, but this would be, let's say, the main objective of what we are going to see now. And also to attain this objective, we are going to try to understand like the most fundamental parts of topological data analysis. And with this, we are going to end the presentation. So it's going to be mainly trying to get these fundamental concepts and some the way that we are going to retrieve the features, and perhaps some mention of applications of it. So we can first begin to think about like how are we going to find the shape of the information that we have. We already thought that we can connect close points, then build a certain type of shape. But to be more specific with this, we are going to have this definition of the simplex. That is going to be the basic unit on which we are going to build this representation of the information. So this simplex it's going to be defined by the convex hull of a set of points that we have, and this set of points have to be affinely independent points. So for me, at the first time that I read this, it didn't make much sense because I didn't know like the definitions of it. So for me, it helped me a lot to understand the definition. So we can first begin by thinking about a set of points that are going to be affinely independent points. So we also first think like we are going to have a set of k+1 points, and they are going to be independent if, let's say, we are going to subtract from our point k1 to x, not k1, x1 to xk, x0, and they have to be linearly independent. If we think about an example in 2 dimensions, and if we take like already 2 vectors, we know that with these 2 vectors that are different, we can span all the possible vectors in the space of the plane. So we just need to span everything that we get in this dimension. But in this case, for the definition of affinely independent points, we say like, okay, if in 2 dimensions, 2 vectors are enough to span all the space, we have three affinely independent points. So the number of affinely independent points, it's always going to be 1 more than the number of our dimensions. So if we are thinking in 2 dimensions, we are going to have 3 points. If we think about 3 dimensions, we are going to have 4 points that are going to be affinely independent. And what is this convex hull? This convex hull is just going to be the convex combination of all the points that we have. In this case, we can also think that a convex combination is just going to be a weighted sum of all of our points, where the weights are going to be positive, and they have to positive or 0, and they have to sum to 1. So if we think about 3 points in the 2-dimensional space, and all the convex combinations that are inside, we are going to form a triangle. And if we go to a 3rd dimension, where we have 4 points, and we have to do like all this weighted sum of all these 4 different points, we are going to get a tetrahedron. So this definition of this simplex is telling us that these basic units are going to look pretty similar to what we think has triangles, let's say. Yeah, in lower dimensions, we like in dimension 0, we have a point. In dimension 1, we have a line. But in general, we can think about this idea of having triangles that are going to build some type of shape. These are going to be the simplex units that are going to be the units that we are going to build the data that we are having. And yeah, like we are going to represent the data with a simplicial complex, and the simplicial complex only is a set of simplices in different types of dimension. But we have 2 conditions that any phase of the simplex of K is going to be also a here the notation is not completely right, just because I was saying like if we have a triangle, any face of it, so its corners and vertices are also going to be part of the simplicial complex K, that it's the bigger one, that is going to be the set of all these little simplices. And the intersection of 2 of them has to be either empty or a common face of both. So this would be just the 2 conditions that we have to take into account to aggregate all of these small units that are called simplices to represent the data that we have. So here is just a visual example of how we can represent the image of a dolphin with a collection of, in this case, triangles, right? So all of these triangles are going to be simplices in 2 dimensions that are going to be collected together, that are going to provide a representation of the data. And later on, we can try to also get some information about how these simplices are connected together, how they are glued together, let's say, to have the features. And we are going to do this by this way. Here is the definition of the nerve, but let's see first at the graphs that are at the bottom, that I think they are going to capture what I am trying to convey here. So our data would be at the left part of this graph, at the set, what we say M. So all of these yellow regions are going to have our data points around the colors that we see. Let's say that our points are not outside what this yellow region is. And for our dataset M, we can represent it as a collection of smaller subsets that have some overlap. This is going to be the cover, and this is going to be named U. In U here, we can see that we have different types of circles that have some overlap, but in like the union of all of them, it's covering the space that we have in M, that is the space where we have our data points. And what would be what we are going to say with the nerve is that the nerve, that is the graph at the right, is going to encode the information of the space of M. This is going to be with the nerve theorem, but here we can see that we are going to connect the circles that are overlapping and create simplices with them. And with the nerve theorem, we say that this is going to encode the information of the space M. So we are already like seeing how we are going to try to describe the information of the data with these topological constructions that we are seeing here. So just here the conditions for the nerve, that they have to have some overlap within each other, and that the union of them has to cover all the space where the data points are. Yeah, as I was mentioning a bit before, like the consequence of the nerve theorem would say that that this collection of circles that we are creating is going to encode the topological space of M, and M is the space where our data is. So that's good. Like if we are going to get like this elaboration of the simplicity that is the nerve of our data, we are going to have like a good representation of it. And how can we create this? Well, in the previous example, we were seeing some circles over there, and we are going to create these circles, this ball actually, that are in different dimensions with some distance here, with some radius here, some alpha. We're going to create the circles around our data points, so as we are seeing here in the picture. And then we are going to connect the circles that have some overlap between them to create simplices. So in this case, we are just going to have like a line, because there is no like an overlap between more than two circles around here, some lines in here. But here we are having more than two circles that are overlapping within each other, so we are going to get other type of simplices in here. We are going to get a triangle instead of just one line. And the idea would be to try to get this this representation out of the data, making these circles that are named the check complex. And with this, we are going to later on have the features to later on put it in our models. But before doing this, we are just going to mention some application that it's used in exploratory data analysis and visualization, that is using all of the things that we have seen until now. And this would be the mapper algorithm. With the mapper algorithm, we are going to be able to visualize our information in this way of a simplicial complex. But we are going to do it in the following way. So first we have like a dataset X that we are going to map it, let's say, to one dimension, or like a low dimensional space. This is why it says R or RD. And then in this space, let's say we apply PCA, and then we have just one dimension. After we have this representation of our data, we are going to define a cover of this low dimensional space. So the cover would be to try to get these different types of subsets of the information that have certain type of overlap, but the union of all of them is representing the data that we want to describe. Let's continue with this. So we are going to project the information to a low dimensional space. And in the low dimensional space, we are going to make different types of clusters. These clusters are actually like the covers of U. So they are going to have some overlap between each other, Then we are going to go back to a representation of the data in the dimensions as it is, and we are going to make a simplicial complex out of it based on the segmentation that we did in the low-dimensional space. So I think we can see this more clearly at this graph, where we have our data, we take it to low-dimensional space, then we make the cover of it, so we are going to make different types of sets that have some overlap. Then we go to our data again, and make a simplicial complex regarding the way that these groups are connected. So here we would have like this yellow cluster over here that is connected with the red one. But what I was saying a little bit before was that it's interesting to see the difference between two of these clusters that are yellow. So they have like two different connections with the cluster that is blue. And well, in these other parts, we also have the connection with the rest of the clusters. Also interesting to see here that this cluster is not going to be connected with these other points. It's just going to be connected with the blue one. And yeah, like this would be just some application where we are going to try to get some perhaps qualitative type of information out of our data. And the use can be perhaps limited to exploratory data analysis, where we want to make some general conclusions about information, not conclusions, but perhaps some idea on how the points are related, and yeah, pretty general descriptions for it. This would be an application of how a simplicial complex can describe the information. But as we are saying, in this case, we are not taking features, we are just taking qualitative data out of this way of organizing our data points. But now we are going to move on to a part where we are going to calculate actual feature numbers for all of this. And this is going to help with the theory of homology and persistent homology. In this case, we can just think about homology of the encoding of information of different types of shapes. And we are going to have different types of numbers or different types of, let's say, meanings to different types of dimensions. In this case, we are going to focus on dimensional holes. And these dimensional holes, let's say in dimension 0, they are just going to be a one connected component. In dimension 1, they are going to be circular holes. And in dimension 2, they are going to correspond to cavities. And we can arrive until there because we cannot think of higher dimensional types of holes. But in this case, we can use these k-dimensional holes that are represented by the Betty numbers of a particular shape to try to also have now a number, a quantitative number that can be later on be used in models for us to make classifications or the different type of tasks that we are interested in. In the graph of the right, we just have some examples of the Betty numbers of these dimensional holes that we can have across different types of shapes. And perhaps we can just mention the case of the torus, where we are seeing that there are two types of circular holes. And they are two types because they are also independent, let's say. One is going to go from the left to the right of the torus, and one goes from the top to the bottom. So this would be the idea, to try to, like, we are having some quantification of the shape of the data, so we can later use it in some models. But now, like this representation of the Betty numbers are also made on constructions of our data. These constructions can also have different types of, let's say, different types of representations. So, for instance, we already know that we have like a representation of data that is with a simplicial complex, but to study how we can see the appearance and disappearance of these dimensional holes, we are going to do filtrations on our data. And these filtrations can happen in two ways. In this way, we are filtering data just in one dimension, that is going to be dimension Y. And then we are going to see what are going to be the components that appear or disappear in this situation. I'm just quickly going to move to the other case, so it's also like a congruent explication. In this case, we are not going to take it to just a one-dimensional space, but we are going to build this check complex as we were seeing before. We are going to make a simplicial complex with a given radius, and then we are going to track the changes of these dimensional holes that we get of all these different shapes when we vary the length of the radius and see like that there are different types of connections on our data. Perhaps we can just go back to this case just to analyze it in a bit further. Since we are just mapping all the information to one dimension, we are going to have like zero-dimensional holes that are going to be just components. And we're going to track how these components appear and disappear in terms of looking at how are we going to move in this dimension Y. So we are going to begin from top to bottom. And we see that the first point that we see is at A1, we are going to see the first appearance of the first component. So the birth of this component, it's around here, the same point A1. Then we go above and we see the appearance of another component because these lines over here are just going to be an extension of this component 1. We go to 2, and there is the birth of component 2 at this point, that it's also A2. We go on, and we see the birth of component 3, that it's around here. And the next step would be to recognize that component 3 is going to be gone. It's going to be disappear. Why? Just because we are going to connect component 3 with component 1. We see that at this height, where is the end of this component, we are mixing this point with this point. So component 3 is gone. It's an extension of component 1. But this is not going to happen for component 2. It's going to linger a little bit more. Here we see that it lingers until A5. That is going to be also connected with component 1. And at the end, we're going to say, okay, we arrive at point A6, so A1 it's gone too. So the idea of having these filtrations would be to tracking the appearance and disappearance of these dimensional holes if we are going to change, in this case, the space that we are reviewing in this one-dimensional representation. But in the next case, it would be with varying the radius. Here, the example is just with zero-dimensional components, just because we have a line. But in here, we can have other types of representations or other types of dimensional holes in these situations, right? So at the beginning, we have the zero-dimensional components that are just the points, but at some definition of the radius, they are going to start to connect. So here we're also going to see like the emergence of one-dimensional holes, that they are going to be represented by these Betty numbers 1. That here we are seeing like different types of colors. We also see that at this representation C, we do not already see like connected components that are of dimension 0 that are connected. We only see that there are circular holes because like they are all glued together now. All of them have disappeared. And as we increase also the radius, we can see that these circular holes are also going to disappear at some time. Here, all of them are overlapping. We don't have like a hole anymore. This is the only hole that is going to persist. And then here we can see like the representation of when they appear and disappear, and we can take them as features. No, at the point of time that they are appearing, at the point of time that they disappear, and here in the colors we are just differentiating between a zero-dimensional hole and a one-dimensional hole. And this would be the last part of the presentation, because with this, we already have some quantitative representation of the shape of our data. And the point that would follow next is just using this information in the task that we want to solve. So here would be some of the final bullet points that I want to point out for the presentation.
some conditions that were also mentioned in the paper that I didn't went through, but I think they are worth mentioning. That, for instance, the need of regularity in the data. We need that data is regular, so that the representation of our simplicial complex is not going to give us like erroneous representation of it. And in this case, like building this simplicial complex is also important to know that not all the metrics are going to be robust outliers. So if we take like perhaps an Euclidean distance, this is not going to work, right? Because it's going to be very sensitive to points that are far away. So these are points that we have to take into account at the moment that we are going to try to summarize the information of our data with the simplicial complex. Then there is a discussion that it's very important, I think, not only in the case of TDA, but also like for any type of task that we want to do. It's the trade-off that we are going to have between stability and the discriminative capacity of representations. So we don't want to generalize too much so that we are going to, let's say, overlook some patterns that we are really interested in. But on the other side, we also don't want to fit the noise that it's in the data. And this is a point that that the paper says that TDA is very sensitive to, and it's a consideration to have in mind. They also mentioned that we can make some confidence estimates of the numbers that we are going to get here with the persistent barcodes of the different betting numbers here to try to get, let's say, some perhaps even some distribution on how the numbers they are, so we can be more sure about the value that we are seeing, right? That it's not about noise, but it's also a number that we should expect with this given information that we are creating. And lastly, here just mentioning some other applications that can be done with TDA, just because in general we would mostly be focused on generating features out of these representations of the data and then using it in other types of models. So mainly use it to feature engineering, or as in the case of the MARP algorithm, to use it to EDA. But they were mentioning that there are some examples where we can try to use persistent homology to add some type of regularization at loss functions. That is, this is something that it was interesting to me. Look interesting. And finally, yeah, that mentioning that there is like a Python library named Woody that has like some different examples of applications that are done with topological data analysis. And it's very interesting to see that they are working with, let's say, with images, has the case that we saw with MNIST, that we are going to try to characterize numbers in terms of their topological information to do classification over it. But there were also an example, not in the library, but in the literature, where they were doing, they were extracting topological features out of tomography samples that were taken for people that were being tested for COVID, and that these topological features used with a support vector machine were actually going to give like a predictive quality that was pretty similar to deep learning models. So that was really nice to see. Then the examples that they give at the paper is the different characterization of proteins, of time series classification. And in the library of Goody, there is an example that they are also using the retrieval of the persistent homology features with a Bayesian approach, so we can have also a classification that is going to consider the distributions that we can think that are proper of these specific classes of values. So yeah, I guess they mentioned like some different applications in the literature. In the paper, they also make reference to various examples, but they are also very cautious about saying that that the use of TDA, it's also a bit difficult or like this is something that it has to be argued, right? It's not that we are going to take the topological features and they are going to help right away, but I take it more like as an invitation for us to perhaps explore some of the topological features that we can have with our data and see if we can get some better results with our different tasks that we are solving here at the AI team. So yeah, this is everything that I have prepared for the presentation, and if there is any type of comments, it's very well received.